She arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. The old wall clock in the lawyer's office clicked once, sharp and accusing, as the door opened. Daniel felt the sound more than he heard it. He kept his eyes on the divorce papers in front of him, pretending to read words he already knew by heart. Termination of marriage. Division of assets. No contest. Clean. Simple. That was how he wanted this to end. Her footsteps were soft, careful, like she was measuring the room before stepping fully into it. "Ms. Carter," the lawyer said politely. She nodded and took the chair across from Daniel. The leather creaked under her weight. He noticed that. Her weight, before he noticed anything else. Something about the way she lowered herself felt different. Slower. Protective. She didn't look at him. 8 months apart had taught him her silences. This one was controlled, deliberate. Not the angry kind. Not the broken kind. It unsettled him. "You look well," he said automatically, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Thank you," she replied, her voice even, distant. She wore a light beige coat, buttoned all the way up, though the late afternoon heat pressed against the windows. A thin sheen of sweat glimmered at her temple. Daniel frowned slightly but said nothing. He told himself not to care. This was the end. He was here to sign, stand up, and walk away lighter than he had been in years. The lawyer began explaining the documents, flipping pages with practiced efficiency. Daniel finally lifted his gaze. That was when she reached for the first button of her coat. His attention sharpened, a strange tightening in his chest. She hesitated, just for a second, fingers trembling before she undid the button. Then another. Then another. The fabric fell open. Daniel's breath left him in a silent rush. Her stomach was round and unmistakable beneath the soft fabric of her dress. Not subtle, not early. 7 months. Maybe more. Time seemed to fracture, stretching thin and unreal. His hands went cold. The room tilted. Pregnant. The word slammed into his mind, loud and unforgiving. His eyes flicked to her face. Still calm. Still avoiding his gaze. As if this revelation were an inconvenience, not an earthquake. "As this," he began, his voice cracking halfway through. She lifted one hand gently, resting it over her belly, the gesture instinctive, protective. "Let's finish the paperwork first," she said quietly. The lawyer cleared his throat, oblivious, or pretending to be. "Shall we continue?" Daniel nodded numbly, though his heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He stared at the papers again, but the words no longer made sense. All he could see was her. All he could think was how, in a single unbuttoned coat, everything he thought he knew had changed. The lawyer's voice droned on, calm and professional, as if nothing in the room had shifted. Clause numbers. Property division. Signatures required at the bottom of each page. Daniel heard the sounds, but they refused to become meaning. His world had narrowed to the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Her hands rested on the curve of her stomach now, fingers laced together as though holding something fragile in place. The sight rooted him to his chair. He had seen her like this before, protective, guarded, when she thought something precious was about to be taken from her. He swallowed hard. 7 months, he calculated helplessly. The number aligned too easily with memory. The last night, the argument that started over nothing and ended with everything. Her back turned to him in bed, her silence louder than shouting. He had left the next morning without saying goodbye. His pen hovered above the paper, unmoving. Across from him, she sat rigid, shoulders tense beneath. The thin fabric of her coat now resting open. Her jaw was clenched so tightly he could see the muscle twitch. She refused to look at him, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the lawyer's shoulder, as if staring straight at Daniel would crack the fragile control she had built around herself. He wanted to ask. The questions pressed against his chest, begging to escape. Why didn't you tell me? Is it mine? How long have you known? Did you plan to disappear with my child? Each question felt like a weapon. He didn't trust himself to choose the right one. The lawyer slid another document toward her. If you'll initial here. She reached for the pen. Her hand shook. Daniel noticed that too. She signed slowly, carefully, as if each letter carried weight. When she finished, she let out a breath she had clearly been holding. The silence between them thickened, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of words buried alive. Daniel finally forced his pen to move. The scratch of ink against paper sounded unnaturally loud. With every signature, a hollow ache settled deeper in his chest. He was signing away a marriage while staring at proof that something of it had survived. Her foot shifted under the table. Uncomfortable. Tired. He remembered how she used to fidget like that when she was exhausted but refused to admit it. The memory hit him harder than the shock. She was carrying a life. His life. He was almost certain now. Still, she said nothing. Still, he said nothing. The lawyer gathered the papers with a satisfied nod. That concludes everything. Daniel lifted his head, finally meeting her eyes. For a fraction of a second, her composure cracked. Fear flickered there, not for herself, but for what might come next. Then she stood, smoothing her coat back into place, sealing the truth away once more. The silence followed them out of the office, unbroken, waiting to explode. The office door closed behind them with a muted click. For a moment, they stood in the narrow hallway, the air between them tight and electric. The lawyer's footsteps faded in the opposite direction, leaving them alone with everything they had avoided saying for months. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too loud, too bright. Daniel spoke first, his voice rough. How long? She turned slowly, one hand bracing against the wall as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Does the exact date matter? She asked. Her tone was steady, but her eyes shone with restrained emotion. It matters to me, he said. Everything matters now. She laughed once, short, bitter. You don't get to decide that anymore. The words stung, but he deserved them. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping in front of her. His eyes dropped to her stomach again, softer this time, almost reverent. It's mine, he said. Not a question. She closed her eyes. That single gesture answered everything. Yes, she whispered. It's yours. The hallway felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in. Daniel took a step back, chest tightening. Guilt surged up, hot and suffocating. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked despite his effort to stay calm. I had a right to know. Her composure finally fractured. A right, she repeated sharply. You walked out, Daniel. You said you were done. You said we were poison to each other. What part of that sounded like an invitation? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over despite her attempt to hold them back. She brushed them away angrily. I found out 2 weeks after you left. 2 weeks of staring at a test, convincing myself it was wrong. And when it wasn't, her breath hitched. I didn't want to trap you. I didn't want our child to grow up feeling like a mistake. He stared at her, stunned by the weight of her words. I was scared, she continued, her voice softer now. Scared you'd resent me. Scared you'd stay out of obligation and hate me for it. Scared I'd lose myself trying to keep us together. Daniel felt the truth of it settle deep in his chest. He had left because he felt suffocated, because every conversation felt like a battle. But he hadn't considered the wreckage his absence would leave behind. I never would have called our child a mistake, he said quietly. She met his gaze then, eyes red but steady. But you might have called me one. The words landed between them, heavy and final. He had no defense. All the anger he'd carried dissolved into something heavier, regret. He hadn't frozen back in the office because he was shocked. He had frozen because he saw, all at once, what he had almost lost without ever knowing it existed. And for the first time since the divorce began, the truth stood naked between them, demanding to be faced. They stepped out of the building together, though neither had suggested it. Late afternoon light spilled across the parking lot, warm and blinding after the cold sterility of the hallway. She paused near the steps, one hand resting on her lower back now, fatigue finally breaking through her careful control. Daniel noticed immediately. Are you okay? He asked, instinct overriding pride. She nodded. Just tired. The word carried more meaning than he could unpack. Tired of secrets. Tired of carrying everything alone. The signed divorce papers sat heavy in Daniel's briefcase. He had wanted freedom, closure. Now the weight felt undeserved. He watched her stare across the lot, eyes unfocused, as if she were already bracing for a future she had planned without him. I know I don't get to ask for much, she said quietly, still not looking at him. I didn't tell you because I wasn't asking you to stay. And I'm not asking you to come back now. He swallowed. But this child deserves honesty, she continued. Not lies. Not resentment. If you want to be involved, it has to be because you choose to be, not because of guilt. Her words were firm, protective. She wasn't shielding herself anymore. She was shielding the life inside her. Daniel stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. I don't want to be a ghost, he said. I don't want my child wondering why their father disappeared. She finally turned to him. For the first time that day, there was no fear in her eyes, only caution. Hope hovered at the edges, fragile and unspoken. I'm not promising forgiveness, she said. And I'm not reopening old wounds. I'm not asking you to, he replied. I'm asking for a chance to do this right. As a father, nothing more. Silence settled between them again, but it felt different now, lighter, breathable. She studied his face, searching for the man she once loved and the man he might still become. After a long moment, she nodded once. Then start by listening, and by showing up. I can do that, he said, voice steady. Every time, she exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden she'd carried alone for months. Her hand returned to her stomach, thumb brushing a small, absent-minded circle. The marriage was over. The papers proved that, but as they stood side by side in the fading sunlight, bound by a future neither had planned, something else quietly began. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but responsibility. And sometimes, that was the most honest beginning of all.